few months ago, I decided it was time to do something special for my wife. Life had been busy for both of us, and I felt it was overdue for us to reconnect with a night dedicated to just the two of us. I made arrangements for our kids to stay with my parents, who live about an hour and a half away, and planned a full evening, a nice dinner reservation and maybe a few cozy spots for drinks afterward. Ordinarily, when I visit my parents, I stay most of the day, catching up with them and letting the kids enjoy time with their grandparents. It's common for us to head back around dinner time. But this time, my plan was different. I would drop the kids off, spend a little time with my parents, and head straight back home so I could surprise my wife early. I left around 9 o'clock in the morning and was on my way back home before 1:30 in the afternoon, eager to get everything ready for the night ahead. As I turned onto our street, I noticed a truck parked near the house. A bit unusual, but I brushed it off, thinking it could be someone visiting a neighbor or making a delivery. Deciding to surprise my wife without alerting her, I parked a few houses away and slipped in through the basement door, planning to sneak upstairs and catch her off guard with my early return. As I made my way inside, I heard faint sounds from the floor above. At first, I thought maybe she had some music on, or maybe she was in the middle of an exercise routine. But the sounds grew clearer, and my mind quickly veered into a darker possibility. I stopped in my tracks, listening. Then, unmistakably, I heard a man's voice. A feeling of dread and disbelief washed over me, and my heart pounded in my chest. My instinct was to leave right away, but a strange sense of needing to know what was happening rooted me to the spot. I moved quietly toward the stairs, unsure of what I might find but unable to stop myself from seeing it through. The closer I got, the clearer the sounds became, leaving no doubt about what was happening. I paused by the partially open door that led to the living room. Standing just out of view, I could hear everything without seeing them directly. It was then that I took out my phone, my hands trembling, and started recording. I held it just around the edge of the wall, capturing enough of the scene without stepping into view. My stomach turned as I saw my wife with a man I'd never met, and even as I held the camera, I felt detached, almost like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. For several minutes, I just stood there, unable to move. The sounds, the laughter, and their casual intimacy were like needles piercing me. Then I heard her say something about heading upstairs, laughing as she mentioned they still had some time left. They disappeared up the stairs together, leaving me standing there in the quiet aftermath of what I'd just witnessed. In a daze, I walked into the living room and saw his clothes left casually on the floor. I picked up his pants, found his wallet, and took a quick photo of his driver's license, memorizing his name and address. Without a sound, I left through the same basement door, almost instinctively, and went back to my car. Once there, I broke down completely. Sitting in the driver's seat, I felt a weight of shock and sadness pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I played the recording to make sure it captured everything, and each second of it only solidified the reality I'd been hoping wasn't true. I knew I couldn't go back to my parents to pick up the kids without some sort of explanation. I felt too numb, too hollow to even think of the words I'd use. After what felt like an eternity, I decided to return to the house, to pretend like I was coming home to surprise her, as if none of this had happened. I pulled into the driveway, made sure to open and close the garage door loudly, and walked in, still feeling the sting of what I'd seen. She looked genuinely startled when I entered, pulling her robe tighter and asking why I was back so soon. She stammered something about getting ready for a bath, and I could see the shock in her eyes, but I forced a smile and told her about my plan to surprise her with an early return for our night out. She quickly recovered, poured us both a glass of wine, and suggested we get ready. I played along, staying silent for the most part, feeling like I was watching this scene from a distance. As we sat together, I could see out of the corner of my eye that man sneaking down the stairs, slipping out the back door through the basement. I said nothing. I let her continue on, laughing and chatting as though everything were normal, as though our lives hadn't just changed in that single afternoon. Since that day, I haven't been able to stop watching the recording, reliving every painful moment, searching it for answers or explanations. I still haven't told her what I know, and every time she asks if I'm all right, I feel a strange numbness that keeps me from responding. I'm stuck in a loop of replaying the scene, watching it again and again, hoping for clarity but feeling more lost each time. The weight of what I saw, of what I recorded, presses down on me daily, and I haven't been able to decide what to do next, feeling like I'm caught in a storm of my own making. Eventually, I stopped watching the video. Cutting that loop of constant replay finally brought me some relief, helping me to think more clearly about my next steps. It allowed me to return to a semblance of normalcy, both for my kids and for my job, where I knew I needed to be mentally present. I'd gone through my wife's phone, carefully combing through messages and contacts, but I found nothing suspicious. It was like she'd covered her tracks, or perhaps there hadn't been anything ongoing to cover up. That uncertainty kept me uneasy, but I kept my observations quiet. Curious about the man I'd seen, I searched his name from the driver's license photo I'd taken. Turns out he was a landscaper. It made sense. A few months back, she'd mentioned calling someone to help tidy up our yard, setting up some mulching and clearing work. It was strange thinking back to those conversations, piecing together moments that seemed ordinary at the time but now felt charged with hidden meanings. I'd driven past his house a few times since. From what I could tell, he lived alone. The only vehicle I ever saw was a truck parked in the driveway. Each time I passed, I watched for any signs of another life, any other hint of his connection to her. But the house seemed quiet, almost abandoned. At home, I'd been doing my best to avoid extended one-on-one time with her, especially after the kids went to bed. The distance helped me avoid those awkward, probing conversations or, worse, the possibility of intimacy, which I couldn't stomach. I'd mostly managed to keep my distance, though I slipped one night after having a bit too much to drink. I hated myself the next morning, guilt and resentment clouding every memory of that night. I'd kept an eye on her comings and goings, although it was impossible to monitor her every move. While I couldn't install a tracker due to compatibility issues with her phone, I'd set up a doorbell camera to keep an eye on the street in front of our house. She hadn't commented on it, perhaps taking it as a random upgrade. In our daily family routine, I made a conscious effort to act like I didn't know anything, focusing on being a stable, caring dad for our kids. Then something else cropped up. My wife mentioned a plan to go out with a friend from work, someone I'd never met and didn't know from social media. I'd made a half-hearted excuse about work, telling her I couldn't be home to watch the kids. She managed to get our neighbor to babysit, seeming undeterred. I was torn about her night out. Should I trust her story, or was she planning to meet him? The thought gnawed at me, as if everything might spiral into a confrontation I wasn't sure I was ready for. Now, as she prepared to head out, I weighed my options. If I followed her, at least I could know the truth. But even that thought filled me with dread. I didn't want to see any more than I already had. Still, the thought of driving past her destination, confirming if she was truly meeting her friend, might give me the clarity I needed. I was planning to leave soon, under the guise of going to work, even though I'd only be heading to a bar nearby to pass the time. When she left, I'd follow, staying just close enough to catch a glimpse of her true destination. The dread in my chest was almost unbearable, yet I felt trapped, knowing that no matter what I found tonight, nothing could undo the mess we were already in. On the night she was supposed to meet her friend, I went along with my original plan, pretending I had to work late. After the babysitter arrived, I headed out. I went to a nearby bar to pass some time, nursing a few drinks before deciding to check the restaurant where she'd said she'd be. Seeing her car in the lot filled me with a mix of dread and anxiety. I couldn't shake the fear of walking in and catching her with that guy. My plan was to slip in unnoticed, just to see for myself, but that backfired the moment I walked through the door. She saw me instantly, and I had no choice but to walk over and greet her. She was there with her friend, not the man I'd been fearing. We had the usual back and forth. "What are you doing here? I thought you were working." I told her my shift ended early and thought I'd stop by since we had the sitter at home. After a quick drink, I left and went home to relieve the babysitter. Yet, something inside me felt unresolved. All of the advice I'd read kept pushing me toward confrontation, and that night, I decided I couldn't hold it in any longer. After getting the kids to bed, I sat up, waiting for her to come home. When she arrived, she immediately sensed something was off. I didn't waste any time. I told her what I knew, laying it all out there before she even had a chance to sit down. I showed her a part of the video, revealing what I'd seen. The anger that had been building for so long spilled out, and I couldn't hold back the hurtful words. I told her she destroyed our life together. Her reaction was immediate. She broke down, shaking and crying, telling me how awful she felt and how deeply she regretted everything. I pressed her for the full story, and she confessed. She admitted to meeting him twice, including the time I caught them, but said she had ended things after realizing how wrong it was and because she still loved me. When I asked for proof, she insisted she'd already blocked and deleted him from her phone and social media accounts. She assured me he was single and knew she was married, making her actions even harder to understand. At one point, she asked me to delete the video, but I refused, not having a reason other than a need to keep it. She seemed hurt and even a bit angry, questioning if I planned to watch it again. By then, it was so late that we decided to call it a night and agreed to talk more in the morning. She apologized over and over, and that night we slept in separate rooms. In the days that followed, the tension began to ease. There was a sense of relief now that the truth was out in the open, and we continued talking. It felt like we were on the path toward repairing our relationship, even though the damage was still raw. I made it clear that any contact with that man was completely off-limits, and she agreed. Despite the progress, I was still struggling to trust her. To complicate things, I have an upcoming work trip that I can't avoid. I told her I was uncomfortable leaving, but my boss made it clear that my presence is required. She suggested setting up cameras around the house if it would give me peace of mind. The fact that I might actually consider it left me feeling sad about how far things had fallen. I'd be gone for 3 days, and even with the progress we'd made, the thought of leaving was hard to bear. In the weeks that followed our confrontation, things felt strained but manageable. We were talking, trying to rebuild trust, yet something inside me still simmered, a feeling that wasn't quite anger but more like a need for closure, on my own terms. I wanted her to feel a fraction of the betrayal and humiliation I'd been through. I didn't want to forgive and forget so easily, and the idea of just moving on felt wrong somehow. One day, while she was out running errands, I decided to dig a little deeper, rewatching that video one last time, letting the reality sink in again. I didn't keep it out of any sentimental need to cling to the past. This was more like fuel. I had an idea, one that felt satisfying in a dark way. I reached out to a lawyer who specialized in divorce and asset protection. This wasn't me filing for divorce, at least not yet, but I needed to understand my options, especially if I wanted to gain custody of the kids if things ever went south. I made sure to learn about everything I could do to keep the house, protect my finances, and ensure that if I decided to leave her, I'd be in control. But that wasn't the full plan. I wanted her to feel exposed, vulnerable, and unsure of what was coming next. So, I started acting overly sweet, more attentive than usual, more affectionate. I'd bring home flowers, plan little outings, surprise her with gestures she didn't see coming. I could see she was confused, even suspicious, wondering if I'd truly forgiven her or if something else was happening. The longer this went on, the more she seemed to relax, perhaps thinking that I was finally ready to let it go. She didn't realize I was setting up the next part. Quietly, I tracked down the landscaper. I hadn't gone to confront him before, but I knew where he lived. Instead of contacting him directly, I left anonymous messages with his business's clients, letting them know the truth about who they were hiring. I hinted at his involvement with married women, using vague enough language to make them wonder but clear enough to hurt his reputation. I wanted him to feel a bit of the fallout from his actions. Then, on one of the date nights I had planned, I decided it was time to lay it all on the table. I took her to the restaurant where she'd met her friend that night, the one I'd followed her to. Over dinner, I brought up every detail she thought I'd forgotten or moved past. I wanted her to know I hadn't forgiven or overlooked anything. I'd simply been waiting, gathering my strength and options. When we got home, she looked shaken. I left her alone for a while, letting her absorb everything. Finally, she came to me, apologizing again, and asked if there was anything she could do to make things right. I told her plainly that she needed to work on regaining my trust and that it would be a long road. In truth, I wasn't sure I'd ever fully trust her again. But watching her squirm, unsure of where things stood, was the closure I needed. From then on, I kept the act going, swinging between kindness and coldness, letting her feel as uncertain as I had felt in those long, painful days after I first discovered the truth. It wasn't a complete fix for what she'd done, but it felt like a small taste of justice. For now, I would stay, but on my terms, letting her see that forgiveness wasn't a gift easily given, and redemption wouldn't come cheap. As the months wore on, the push and pull between us became our new normal. She tried to regain my trust, but every kind gesture, every apology only reminded me of the betrayal, and the satisfaction I'd felt in the early stages of my revenge faded. Watching her struggle with guilt had given me a sense of power at first, but as time passed, it felt emptier. The reality of living in a fractured marriage, always watching, always doubting, became exhausting. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, we sat in silence, the weight of everything unsaid filling the room. Finally, she looked at me and asked, "Are we going to live like this forever?" I realized I had no real answer. The satisfaction of my revenge had faded, replaced by a deep sadness, a realization that I was prolonging my own pain as much as hers. That night, I sat alone, thinking about what I truly wanted. I could keep her in a cycle of guilt and penance, but that wouldn't heal what had been broken. Or I could walk away, free us both from this cycle of anger and resentment. I knew then that holding on to her, and holding her accountable forever, would never restore the trust or joy we'd once had. The next morning, I told her I wanted a separation. There was no argument, no anger, just quiet acceptance. She knew, as I did, that we couldn't keep living in the shadow of what had happened. We agreed to stay civil, to put our kids' well-being first, and to work through the practicalities of moving forward separately. As painful as it was, choosing to let go was also a relief. I had no more need to watch her every move, no desire to cling to bitterness. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace, knowing I was no longer bound by what she had done, and that we both could find a chance to start anew, even if it was apart.